This conference will now be recorded.
Hello, everybody. Jordan Girth here with the National Weather Service Office of Observations. Thank you so much for joining us for the Satellite Book Club Seminar Series. This is session number 214. Hope your November is off to a good start. We've got a great presentation today, NOAA GOES Data Collection System. We're pleased to have Skip Dronen, NOAA GOES Data Collection System Program Manager, with us today. And our facilitator is Elizabeth Wilson, who is the Director of Weather Programs at Synoptic Data Public Benefit Corporation and Environmental Data Aggregator. Elizabeth manages the Mesonet program, the leading commercial data buy program for the NWS, providing upper air, radar, ocean, and surface data for use in NWP and forecasting. In addition to Skip's topic today on DCS, we want to take the opportunity, while Elizabeth is with us, to address any questions you have regarding the National Mesonet program, data access, and the availability of specific observations. So when the Q&A comes up, that would be the time for those questions as well. A few reminders before we dive into Skip's presentation. The session is being recorded, so we ask that you mute your microphone and turn off your webcam when you are not speaking. The Q&A section will be after the presentation, and I would like to encourage attendees to post their questions in the chat, and we will field them in the order they are asked. If you are logged in under a user or service account, please note your full name when asking a question in the chat. We're always looking for future presenters. Please feel free to contact the TowerS team if you're interested in presenting. And there is a link in the chat, courtesy of Emily, to the Satellite Book Club presenter and facilitator form if you would like to be part of this amazing series. And as always, if you're looking for training materials related to satellite or otherwise, Ross Van Til with the Office of the Chief Learning Officer can help with that. I'd like to thank the Office of the Chief Learning Officer, the GEO and LEO programs within NESDIS, our presenter, facilitator, and all of you for being with us today. Special thanks as well to Kashad and Emily and other members of our TowerS team that work behind the scenes to put this seminar series on each and every week. All right, without further ado, let's get to the main event, and that starts with an introduction of Skip Dronen, who joined NOAA and has been the NOAA GOES Data Collection System Program Manager since January of 2022. Prior to NOAA, Skip served as an officer and helicopter pilot in the U.S. Coast Guard. He was raised in Washington State, attended the U.S. Coast Guard Academy, earning a bachelor's in civil engineering while stationed in Mobile, Alabama, and earned a master's in Instructional Systems Design from the University of South Alabama. He has Airline Transport Ratings for both fixed and rotary wing aircraft and is general class amateur radio operator. Skip, we're glad to have you. You're a first-time presenter here at our Satellite Book Club.
Thanks, Jordan. Let's see if my camera pops up. Here we go. Okay. Kind of digitally throwing my voice due to the internet connection here at NSOF, but hopefully I'm coming through okay. Thanks again, Jordan. Thanks for moderating, Elizabeth and Kashad. Thank you for helping me set this up. So after that bio, like what am I doing here talking about a satellite relay system? Like, that's a great question. So hopefully I'll be able to answer some of that in a few minutes. So just preemptively, I'll say there's so many diverse and technical areas in NOAA. I tried to gauge this presentation to be as relevant as possible. Certainly no attempt to go over anyone's head or under anyone's head. So if you have any questions, or particularly if you hear an error, please drop it in the chat and we can talk about it later. So let's move on to the first slide. So what is GOES DCS? So a little history. So it's basically just a radio relay system. So you're sending radio messages from one location to a satellite and back down to Earth. It started way back in the 60s as a prototype on Landsat, and then it was applied in the ATS satellite. In 1975, GOES 1 was launched, and it became the GOES DCS. I'll get into a little more detail here on the next slide, the actual architecture, so let's go to that. So moving from left to right, you were listening to the artist here, so which I don't have a degree in, so I did my best. But on the far left of the slide, you have a data collection platform in a location that's probably not connected to any kind of communication infrastructure like a telephone line or the internet. And that's sort of our use case for the starting point, where a user needs to collect environmental data of some type, and they deploy one of these platforms, usually solar powered. In that DCP is a UHF radio that operates in our narrow 2 megahertz band and sends signals up to one of the 2 GOES satellites, goes east or goes west, which are top middle, and then both of those satellites broadcast back down to our 2 downlink locations. One is the NOAA Satellite Operations Facility, where I'm currently located, and then the other is the Wallops Command and Data Acquisition Site in Wallops Island. So we have redundancy in the system. At that point, we distribute that information to the internet via our web-based tool called the DCS Administrative and Data Distribution System, or DADS, which is that little icon on the far right. So this is probably the most simplest way to describe it. Things can get very complicated in terms of data distribution, which we will maybe touch on later, but that's kind of what the system is architecturally now. Next slide. So now we get into my lead-in, the Western Hemisphere's data relay. So what does that mean? So what this graphic depicts are the footprints of the 2 GOES satellites, and what you would see if you were trying to transmit from a location on Earth, or the area you could operate in with greater than 5 degrees elevation. Obviously, you couldn't be sitting on the North Pole with a radio transmitter that only operates at about 5 watts to get 22,000 miles into space. You would just be blocked by terrain features. So we do have some interesting use cases way down in the polar regions and way up north in the Yukon, where people are able to figure it out and operate in less than ideal conditions to get their data up to the satellite. But this kind of depicts the region of service that the DCS covers. And next slide. All right, so those are the regions, and in terms of scope of this system, there's 2 graphics to kind of show like how dense these platforms are distributed in some areas. You got the U.S., Alaska, Canada, and then South America, and a little bit of Central America on the 2 graphics. But in terms of numbers of data collection platforms, again, remember these are typically remote solar-powered pieces of equipment that have sensors attached to them for whatever purpose the user wants to collect data. Over 20,000 of them in the U.S., 4,500 you could read off the slide. Lots and lots and lots of these things distributed all over the Western Hemisphere. Okay, so we kind of talked about where, how many. Move on to the next slide now. And now it's what? So what environmental data is defined by U.S. code. There are we can't send anything through the system. It has some constraints. So National Weather Service. I just realized I actually don't have weather on here, which is kind of silly. But those are some major categories. This is just a best guess. I'm sure I left some people out. But between hydrofire alerts, just resource management, research, the DCS really can be used for any purpose that's environmental. And for people that are, or organizations that are authorized to use a system, which I can talk about. It is somewhat constrained who can use it, but not as much as you think. So very, very interesting applications. The GOES DCS program doesn't control any of these things, so it's somewhat different than maybe some other satellite products from NOAA, where we're not really providing a product. We're providing the means for a user to obtain the information they want for the purposes they want. Next slide. And again, this is another attempt to sort of throw out a smattering of like who is involved. And it's organizationally, we've got 62 countries, 723 organizational agreements within those countries. Access is really limited to government. And that's really any level. So we have Native American, Indigenous tribes, First Nations, any real, sovereign body, and if it's not government, nonprofits, manufacturers who design and develop and add the technology to the system. And then if commercial companies have a sponsor that is by the government, they can have access as well. I didn't put an asterisk on the slide here, but there are controls in here because as a government agency and within the Department of Commerce, we don't want to compete with the commercial industry. There are commercial data services out there. So we can talk about that if somebody's interested, but we do go through a little bit of a vetting process to ensure we're compliant with the law and we're not competing with the commercial market right now. But our system continues to see growth, and we're still valuable to people where commercial services aren't available or not affordable. Next slide, please. Okay, so I do get into a little bit of detail in some of these slides because this is kind of a typical question, like what exactly are we sending, on these radio messages? And it's really just time series data. We're not sending pictures, we're not sending video. Yes, there are spacecraft, going to the moon and going into space, and they can send pictures back, but we generally limit this to numerical data that can be sent quickly on a recurrent basis. So usually that's a 10-second time window every hour. There are other applications like National Ocean Service. I think we provide 6 minutes, and there's probably some other ones. I have a counterpart I work with, Letitia Reeves, and she's mentioned at the end, and she sort of does the spectrum management on who is where in the system and when they broadcast. And then, those are scheduled, so we have up to 566 channels in this multiplexed band that we send our messages in. But we also have part of that band for unscheduled transmissions. So let's say you have a seismic sensor, or you have a high water sensor or something like that. There's an application to send alert based on conditions. And that becomes important, obviously, for those alert situations like tsunamis. I already mentioned it doesn't send pictures, and I don't know if this is visible on your screen, but of the 2 formats that are currently sent on our system, there's a old school ASCII2 teletype-like format, and in the top line there, the top row, on the far right in the message data block, you can see some numbers. So somebody's actually gathering, decimal information on something which could be every minute, and they send it every hour, or or something like that. But anyway, you can actually read that information there, and then at the bottom you can see message data that's probably in the pseudo-binary format, so it's not really human readable unless you can read the matrix yourself just by looking at it. So there's examples of what the messages exactly look like. Okay, next slide. And we'll go into so what's the future? So I've already mentioned the number of DCPs. So we continue to grow at about 2% per year. Over 33,000 active DCPs, meaning they're transmitting right now, and over 40,000 that are registered. There's some of those are transit, like the Forest Service, who deploys these devices for the firefighting season. We'll see a bump, and then they take them down at the end of the season, and we see a little bit of a drop. So we do expect continued growth. And then things that are important to me as a program manager is that I didn't depict this in the slide at the beginning, but our GOES satellites actually have a radio transmitter that is sending a UHF signal back to the hemisphere that used to be used to prompt the unscheduled report. So if you have a transmitter that's operating on a schedule and you just wanted to say, hey, what's going on right now, you could send a signal, it would kind of bump it. That was an expensive feature at the time. It almost doubled the cost of those transmitters. And so it slowly waned as technology got to the point where microprocessors could actually monitor the parameters and send those unscheduled or random messages based on an event. So really the cost benefit wasn't there for users. So it sort of went away until that same technology, microtechnology, created the potential where that command could be used for something else. And that something else could be have that transmitter reset itself. It's malfunctioning. Maybe that transmitter could change channels, change frequencies, change timing slots. So that's not new. There are systems doing that now. You probably can do it with a home security camera from your phone right now. But for us, it's new. So that's a current project that's in place. And where that's important is if you have 33,000 data collection platforms located all over the place, on top of mountains, on bridges that need to be closed if you need to get to them. You know, that's just two examples. They're all over the place. Servicing these platforms, updating the firmware, you know, troubleshooting them is a significant logistical problem for the people that operate these. In most cases, there are ones that aren't, but the ability to remotely touch these things and change them is kind of a game-changing thing. So we have been in progress. We've already tested it. We've already done remote commands with the benchtop platform on our existing system, and we expect to have a reference design for data collection platforms that can accept commands next June. And so that will be a transformational thing for DCS. And our users have been wanting it for decades. So very exciting. And then I could go into another topic quite in detail here. Radio frequency interference is a big deal these days. There's more transmitters out there. We're in a solar maximum period right now that's causing some UHF blockage due to ionospheric scintillation. Any kind of communication protocol, and there are newer ones out there that are more robust, could be applied, and we're still kind of operating with antique protocols that work good for what they were intended to do, but we are in a new environment, and so we're exploring, you know, protocols that can compact messages so you're just not at risk as long, and some other technologies where you encode or add error correction where you know, the strength of the signal might be lower. And then part of this whole package is, you know, what is the future? It wasn't that long ago where the question was asked is, do we really need a DCS on a NOAA, on a government satellite in the future? There are a lot of commercial vendors out there, but at this point, due to the criticality of this system to so many areas that are remote where there's not commercial service or it's not affordable, the DCS in its current form is planned to be on GOXO. So GOXO satellites are planned to start launching in 2032. So we anticipate the DCS will be around till all of us are retired. Next slide. Okay, what's important? So if you're if this is old hat, then you don't care. But you know, new users really just go to one of our two web pages. You can learn about it with the top link. There's some information on what it's all about, the history of the program, what we're currently working on, and then if you want to actually get a user account, learn about the specifications and get really into the details, you would go to our other web page, or you just contact me or Letitia Reeves at our NOAA email, and we can kind of guide you to the right folks. Next slide. You know, I should have had this one up front. So what a lot of people don't realize is that this is free with an asterisk. So users have to buy their own equipment. You have to figure out how you're going to decode your information. You know, if you're going to just use your laptop, or you're going to build some other exquisite system or something like that. But NOAA does not charge for the service, which makes it, you know, very accessible to a lot of users that aren't big federal agencies. And that I already mentioned the non-compete. So we do go through that vetting to make sure that we're not, you know, getting in the way of the commercial services market. And I think I have one more slide, if you can move on. So I mentioned that the satellites have all these, you know, beautiful instruments that are just basically standalone, and you can go on to any one of the sites and find beautiful images. This is the beautiful image of the DCS. This is about 10 minutes of DCS messages, those tiny narrow little bands trickling down like a waterfall. The y-axis, the top is now, and the bottom is the past. That's what all of those little messages look like coming through. And with that, that is my presentation.
All right, great. Thanks, Skip, for a very interesting presentation. Before we get into the discussion part of this, just a few housekeeping items. First, please do stay on for the discussion. I'm sure a lot of you have some great questions, and we especially encourage participation from the field offices and regional headquarters as well. So if you have questions, you can drop them in the chat, and we'll make sure to ask them. Also, if everyone, if you are going to have your camera on when you speak, if you can change kind of the view setting at the top of the GoToMeeting to active cameras, that will kind of just show people who are talking right now. So it'll kind of be easier to place a face with a name. If you have any feedback on this session or the Satellite Book Club in general, Emily has, I believe, just dropped a link in the chat for a short survey where you can provide some feedback on the session today. And then two other quick things. So a week from today, next Thursday, November 14th at noon Eastern, Mitch Goldberg from the City College of New York is going to discuss the Tropics mission applications. And then also please contact the Tower S team, either Kashad Bowman or Emily Maddox, if you have any questions about the Satellite Book Club or questions about configuration of satellite products. So let's go ahead and dive right into the discussion portion. So if you have questions, please do drop them in the chat. I'm going to start with one to give everyone a chance to think about what they want to ask. But Skip, again, great presentation. So it's amazing how many different ways there are to deliver data. You know, I'm quite familiar with data delivery through my work with the National Mesonet Program and at Synoptic, where we do provide, you know, lots of public and private data to NOAA through our various initiatives. But I'll be honest, I wasn't too familiar with NOAA DCS. I have heard of Open DCS, which I think is somewhat similar, and then I'm also familiar with HADS. I know a few providers in the Mesonet program are utilizing that service to transmit data from their network. So my question is this: why would a data provider choose to send their data via, you know, NOAA DCS versus a more, I'll say, quote unquote, traditional way? And then what are the pros and cons to using this system?
Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth. I love the question because it just came up recently. So I'll use two sort of extreme cases. So one is where Skip Dronen wants to deploy a data collection platform in his backyard for some purpose. If it was legal, I'd have to figure that part out. But I'm not a technical person, so you know I'd have to buy one from a manufacturer. I'd deploy it, and then because I'm not a software programmer, the easiest way for me to get my data from my one site would probably be to log into the DAD system, which you have to have an account to deploy a DCP anyway, and then I would choose that ASCII2 format so I could just read the numbers myself. So that's the pro is that's pretty easy, and if you're not a super technical person or group, you could get your data that way. You can export to Excel or CSV if you wanted it. So that's one case. The other case might be a user like U.S. Geological Survey that has 13,000 data collection platforms, and it would be impossible for them to log into DADS, and they might break our system if they tried. So something like, something like Open DCS, which is not a NOAA specific product, it was developed by major federal agencies for large data needs, would be way more appropriate. So you could handle, you know, way more information. You're downloading an open source group developed suite of tools that connect to servers either at NOAA or at the Emergency Data Distribution Network in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, that's run by the USGS. And then you could, you know, just get your data in a much more computed and orderly way. The con, though, is that's more sophisticated, so you'd have to invest more resources in that. So those are two extremes. And one thing that I'll mention, there are other external connections that come out of DCS. We connect to the National Weather Service Telecommunication Gateway, which folks probably know, so people can access data that way. We also send this data to PDA or ESPC. I'm not sure if I could even pull out what those acronyms are, but basically into some other rebroadcast data services that NOAA provides. So if you're familiar with UMetcast Americas, DCS is actually on that broadcast. If you're familiar with HRIT MWEN, DCS is actually on that, and those provide users alternate ways to receive, but you know, by various methods. And then it might be over answering, but I talk about DCS and people open the door and I jump through it. The satellites actually rebroadcast the raw data back to the hemisphere. So if you just wanted to cut NOAA out of the whole process, other than the getting certified transmitter and getting an account, you could build your own huge antenna and buy your own radio demodulation system and just get it yourself. And Army Corps of Engineers, USGS, Environmental Climate Change Canada, a number of environmental agencies in South America, they just do that because of the resiliency and ability to not rely on internet, terrestrial power, and things of that nature. So hopefully I didn't go too far over there, but.
No. That's great. I'd rather you give a more detailed explanation than a less detailed explanation. So no, thank you. So we do have a question in the chat. Looks like it's from Brian Caffery. He says, WFO Juno ingests data for approximately 10 sites through NWS SBN via DCS and sends that to NDBC before the data gets out to the world. Can NDBC ingest the data directly via DCS and remove the WFO as the middleman in the data flow?
That's a good question. I think yes. I'm not familiar with NWS SBN. Is that an output from the NWS telecommunication gateway? If it is, you could. OpenDCS would be the default, I would say, if that's not what is being referred to there.
All right. Thank you.
I don't know if that answers, but
yeah,
thanks for the question, Brian.
Yeah, he did not respond, but if he responds back with a follow-up, I will let you know. Oh, he said, I believe SBN is through NWS, yeah, telecommunications gateway.
So I can tell a story on that. I don't know if this helps either, but NWS HADS, Brian Jackson, before he retired, if anybody knows Brian, I've only been with NOAA 3 years, so I'm learning about the system and trying to understand parts of it and get explanations for various things. So some historical information was that Brian said that NWS HADS used to use the NWS telecommunication gateway to get their data, but because there's a write time of a few minutes, they discovered that using OpenDCS, they could just get the information quicker, so they chose to use that. I believe NWSTG is still an alternate method, and many DCS users who have critical applications do use multiple methods. So this is going beyond the question again, I apologize, but like the Army Corps of Engineers has their own big satellites. They get the DCS feed directly. They have their own smaller HRIT dishes that gets the DCS feed, and then they also use OpenDCS to get it through the internet. So they have multiple paths.
Okay, great, thank you. So I have another question. Oh, someone wants to ask a verbal question. So let's go ahead, and you can go ahead and unmute and ask your question, please.
Okay, hi Skip. This is Jammer from Aerospace. How you doing? Thank you for that.
I'm good. Hey, Jammer.
Good. Hey, you mentioned RFI, and that's a big subject with the section I work with in aerospace. And I know within the last year or two, we had a RFI case where we found out that the Canada's greenhouse gas satellite signal was interfering with the DCS signal. Can you just summarize how you find those sources of interference and what measures you can take?
Oh, Jammer, it's almost like I planted Jammer for this question. So I'll answer by saying what we've done. So when the greenhouse gas interference was sort of pre-existing when I arrived, but so we monitor our DCS performance as we can. But honestly, we usually hear that there are problems from our users first because they're getting data loss. So when we find out it's something like that, we investigate if it's interference. So I can go to the technical experts at Wallops. They can look at a spectrum analyzer and see if it's voice or something like that. And then once we characterize what the interference is, if we can, because there's lots out there. It could be space weather, it could be other radio transmitters, it could be malfunction of equipment. There was an environmental climate change example where they had a passive receiver that was actually like receiving a transmitter that was nearby and it was interfering with itself. Like there's all sorts of reasons, but once we categorize what the source is, then we can try to mitigate it. Greenhouse gas, in that case, NOAA partnered with another government agency that does satellite geolocation of signals and was able to determine where it was coming from, and NOAA coordinated with the Canadian government, and that's kind of an ongoing thing. But that's typically the process. NOAA DCS doesn't have a geolocation service specifically, so we still rely on non-reimbursable support from other agencies, and just kind of do the best we can. The interference issue does affect us on a daily basis, affects our users on a daily basis, and I can't say it's an emerging threat, but it's certainly a growing one. I don't know if that answers your question, Jammer.
Yeah, that's very good, Skip. Thanks.
All right, thanks for the question. If anybody else has a question, please do drop it in the chat. I will ask one real quick. So I know, Skip, you already somewhat touched on this, but the rise of commercial satellites, can you kind of expand on that? Like, do you think it's going to affect DCS in any way? I know you said DCS will at least be around, I think you said until what, like 2030s, it's, but will the rise of commercial satellites affect this in any way, any kind of partnership? I guess, can you kind of expand on that?
Yes, I think it will, and not in a negative way. I think if the trend of satellite data, collection systems or what have you continue, I think eventually it will become affordable. And so when agencies are looking for more affordable, when agencies are looking for those sources, they might get better service. Honestly, I mean, we're doing our best, but we don't have the flexibility that I think the commercial market has in terms of polished services. So I think people could select that, or it becomes affordable so that they choose it as an alternative. Again, I'll use National Ocean Service as an example. They have integrated platforms, so they'll use DCS, cellular, and Iridium for data sometimes, depending on the need. So I think as it becomes more affordable and people do their own business case analysis when they need to do something, it may allow people to add that capability, or it may supplant it, or it may not even bring them to DCS in the first place. So that's sort of on the receive side. I mentioned the remote commanding topic. Those services exist now, and the more that's available, they're not as expensive because it's not constant data. If you had a data collection platform that you wanted to command, once we get this capability integrated into our system, and that becomes more affordable, then you suddenly have control. So I think the commercial market will benefit there. And then in the whole context, I think it's funny because I sort of within Department of Commerce, I'm trying to put myself out of business, which is okay. I mean, that's as long as people are getting their data. But I do think we will continue to have people in the hemisphere that can't, either by where they're located or what their resources are, won't be able to choose a commercial. And so I think that's why DCS being on GOES and then GeoXO long into the future, into the 2050s is great for the hemisphere.
Great. Any other questions from the audience? If not, I think so. Skip's email was in the presentation, so I'm sure if you have questions, want to talk to him directly, feel free to reach out to him. Also, there were just a few links dropped in the chat, and my email will also be dropped in the chat. Just the program that I work on is a National Weather Service program. Data is freely accessible to the National Weather Service and to NOAA employees. So if you are interested in learning more about that program, have any questions about how you can get the data, please do reach out to me as well. But with that, thank you, Skip, for a great presentation and discussion. I'll throw it back to Jordan.
Thank you so much, Skip, and thank you so much, Elizabeth, and thank you to everyone for participating today. As a reminder, the Satellite Book Club continues each and every Thursday, and that means next week, Thursday, November 14th, we have another presenter. Mitch Goldberg from the City College of New York is going to be discussing the Tropics mission applications. So if you've heard about Tropics, please join us next week. And by the way, it's a little bit more than just the tropical part of the globe. In any case, if you have any questions for the TowerS team, please feel free to contact Ashad and Emily using their email addresses there on the screen or through the Slack Tower-S channel. We're always available to help any field site regarding configuration of satellite products or any questions you have about operational use of satellite products. With that, we will wrap it up for today. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you once again to our presenter and facilitator. Take care, everybody. See you next week.